Welcome back. Today, we're diving deep into finding a place to live in Bangkok, a really exciting prospect, but navigating that rental market.
hmm
It can feel a bit like stepping into a maze sometimes.
Oh, definitely. It's got its own quirks for sure. But luckily, we've got some help understanding it all from a really comprehensive guide by moveandstay.com.
Ah, yes. Move and Stay. They've been around for ages, haven't they?
Yeah.
Helping folks find places.
Yeah, over 25 years, actually, specializing in business travelers and expats across Asia, finding rentals for, a day, a week, months. So they really know the landscape.
Okay, great source then. So our mission today is basically to pull out the most important bits from their guide. We're talking monthly rent, those hidden costs, the actual process of renting, different options.
Exactly. We want to give you the essentials, make it feel, well, less daunting, maybe even spark a few aha moments so you feel ready to, start looking.
Perfect. So let's jump right in. The big one, money. What are we actually talking about price-wise for monthly rent in Bangkok?
Right. So the guide gives some benchmark averages in Thai baht, but, and this is important, they stress these are just starting points. Prices vary like crazy.
Okay, give us some numbers. What about a studio?
For a studio apartment, you're generally looking at maybe 8,000 up to 15,000 baht per month.
8 to 15K. Okay, quite a range already.
It is. Then for a one-bedroom apartment, that typically jumps to between 12,000 and 30,000 baht.
12 to 30. Wow. And bigger places, 2 bedrooms.
For a two-bedroom apartment, yeah, the range is usually somewhere between 25,000 and maybe 50,000 baht.
And condos. They're super popular, right? How do they compare?
Yeah, condos are a huge part of the market. For a one-bedroom condo, the guide puts the average at between 15,000 and 40,000 baht a month, often a bit higher than apartments, maybe because of the facilities.
Right, those pools and gyms. I saw that guide also gave some USD averages, which might click better for some listeners.
They did, yeah. They mentioned around 563 US dollars a month for a one-bed in, like, central Bangkok.
$563 a...
But, and this shows the location factors starkly move further out from the center, and that average plummets. More like 245 US dollars a month.
Whoa. That's less than half, just based on distance. Really hammers home how crucial location is.
Absolutely. And you've got to remember, these are averages for, let's say, standard long-term rentals. Luxury places, sky's the limit, basically. And short-term stays, anything less than 6 months, definitely expect to pay a premium over a yearly lease.
Okay, so location is obviously massive. What other things really pushed that rent figure up or down, according to the guide?
Well, besides the area itself, how close you are to public transport is a huge one. Being near a BTS SkyTrain or MRT subway station, that adds real value.
Oh, yeah, essential in Bangkok if you want to avoid sitting in traffic forever.
Exactly right. Then you've got the building amenities. Does it have a nice pool, a decent gym, good 24-hour security? This thing's cost money to run, so.
So it gets baked into the rent. Makes sense. And I guess the building's age and general condition matter too.
Definitely. A brand new, modern building, well-maintained, it's almost always going to cost more than an older place in the same area, even if the location's identical. Sometimes even just having a good view from the window can bump the price up a bit.
So for you listening, it really boils down to figuring out your must-haves versus your nice-to-haves, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do you absolutely need to be a 2-minute walk from the BPS, or is 10 minutes okay if it saves you money?
Precisely. Is that rooftop pool a deal breaker? Or could you live without it? Getting clear on those priorities early on really helps narrow things down.
Good point. Now, before we dig into the extra costs, the guide briefly mentions the different kinds of places you can rent.
Yeah, the main types are apartments, often bigger units, sometimes unfurnished, usually owned by one company or landlord. Then condominiums or condos, where each unit is owned by a different person, but they share the building and facilities. Then you have serviced apartments, which are more like hotels with extra services, good for shorter stays. And finally, townhouses or houses more space, more privacy, but you'll find those more out in the suburbs usually, not so much right downtown.
Got it. Okay, let's circle back to the money, but beyond just the rent number, what other costs do you absolutely need to budget for when renting in Bangkok?
This is super important, and the guide flags it clearly. The rent is just part one. You'll almost always pay for your own utilities. That means electricity and water, and your internet.
Okay, utilities and internet. Any ballpark figures on those?
The guide's FAQ section gives some rough estimates, around 74 US dollars a month combined for utilities. But, and this is key, electricity can vary hugely. Depends heavily on your AC usage.
Ah, the air conditioning factor. Crucial in Bangkok's heat.
You bet. That $74 could easily be higher if you like it Arctic cold 24/7.
Yeah.
Internet, they quote around 16 US dollars a month, which feels pretty affordable.
So maybe budget a bit more than 74 for utilities just in case, especially if you love AC.
Wise move. Always better to overestimate slightly there. Then the other big upfront cost is the security deposit. Standard practice, usually 2 months rent.
2 months rent? Wow, okay. That's a fair chunk of change to have ready right at the start.
It is. The landlord holds it to cover any potential damages beyond normal wear and tear, obviously, or any unpaid bills like that last electricity bill when you move out.
And you should get it back, right?
Theoretically, yes. The guide says it should be returned if you leave the place in good shape and pay everything you owe. But it's really smart to clarify the exact process and timing for getting that deposit back before you sign anything. Get it in writing if you can.
Good advice. What about things breaking? Maintenance, repairs, who pays for what?
Generally, the guide explains the landlord handles bigger, non-direct issues. Like if the fridge that came with the place suddenly dies or there's a plumbing leak that wasn't your fault.
Oh,
The tenant is usually responsible for damage they directly cause, accidentally break a cabinet door or small routine stuff like changing a light bulb. Landlords typically cover the big building fees like common area upkeep, building insurance, especially in condos. The main thing is just report problems quickly.
right. Communication is key. Now, thinking about expats, people maybe renting in Thailand for the first time, the process itself might seem a bit intimidating. What does the guide say about the steps, the paperwork needed?
First step is getting your documents sorted. Usually you'll need copies of your passport and your current visa. Some places might also ask for your work permit if you have one. Just having those scanned and ready makes things smoother.
And the lease agreement itself, standard stuff.
The most common lease length you'll find is 1 year. You might see 6-month options sometimes, but 1 year is pretty standard for long term. And the guide really stresses this. Read that lease very carefully, every single page.
What should you look out for specifically?
Make sure it clearly states the rent, the deposit amount, any building rules. And pay very close attention to clauses about breaking the lease early. What happens if you have to leave before the year is up? Are there penalties? It's also good to have a basic understanding of tenant rights under Thai law, which the guide does touch on.
Okay, now here's something interesting the guide mentioned. Negotiation. Is rent actually negotiable in Bangkok? Can you haggle?
Yes, and this is a really useful tip. The guide explicitly says negotiation is common and often possible. You might realistically get the asking price down by, say, 5% to maybe even 15%.
Wow, 5 to 15%. That could be a decent saving. How do you go about that?
Well, a couple of approaches. One is offering a longer commitment. If you're willing to sign for, say, 18 months or 2 years instead of just one, the landlord might give you a slightly better monthly rate for that guaranteed income.
I get leverage the longer term. What else?
Another way is during the viewing. If you spot some minor things that need fixing, maybe a dripping tap, a sticky window, a light fitting that's broken, you can politely point them out. Then you could ask if they can be fixed before you move in as part of the deal. It's a soft negotiation, getting a bit of extra value.
Smart. And the guide also mentioned timing, right? Starting the search early.
Yes, crucial advice.
Yeah.
Start looking maybe 1 or even 2 months before you need to move. That gives you time to see several places, compare, and negotiate without feeling desperate. You have more leverage if you're not under pressure.
Definitely. Time is power in negotiation. Okay, Bangkok is huge, so many different areas.
Yeah.
How does the guide help you figure out where to actually live?
It breaks it down into categories based on lifestyle, really. If you want to be right in the thick of it, the central business district, think Siloam, Sathorn is an option.
Right, the heart of the city. What's the reality of living there?
Pros. Super easy commute if you work there. High-end restaurants, shops, amazing transport links. Cons. It's noisy, it's crowded, and it's generally the most expensive place to rent. Classic convenience versus cost trade-off.
Okay. What if you want something quieter, maybe more budget-friendly?
Then look towards what they call suburban areas, like maybe Onnet or Udumsuk, places a bit further out along the SkyTrain lines.
And the pros and cons there.
Pros are definitely lower rent, generally quieter streets, maybe more of a local Thai feel. Cons are the longer commute time into the center and maybe fewer international or high-end shops and restaurants right on your doorstep. Often good for families or people who really value peace over proximity.
Makes sense. And where do most expats tend to end up?
Well, the guide points to the really popular expat neighborhoods, especially along Sukhumvit Road areas like Thonglor and Ekamai are famous examples.
Why are they so popular with foreigners?
Because they have absolutely everything geared towards international residents. Tons of Western restaurants, bars, cafes, international supermarkets, English-speaking services, gyms, everything. Plus, a built-in expat community, which can be nice when you first arrive.
What's the downside?
The main downside is cost. These areas are usually quite expensive, maybe second only to the CBD, and some people feel they can be a bit of a bubble, maybe less authentically Thai than other parts of the city.
So the takeaway really is think hard about your own priorities, work, social life, budget, and then ideally go visit a few different areas, get a feel for the vibe.
Absolutely. Walk around, maybe visit at different times of day, see what feels right for you before you commit to a lease.
We touched on apartments versus condos earlier, but the guide digs a bit deeper. What are the key differences a renter should really understand?
Yeah, the core difference is that ownership structure we mentioned. Apartment building, one owner, one management usually. Condo building, lots of individual owners, plus a management company for the shared bits.
Right, and how does that actually affect you as a renter?
It often shows up in the amenities and maybe the management style. Condos are much more likely to have those really nice shared facilities, big pools, proper gyms, often tighter security like key cards and more guards. Apartments might have some basics, but often less impressive.
Okay, so condos often win on the extras. What about things like parking or upkeep?
Parking is often included or easier to arrange with condos. Common areas in condos, lobbies, hallways, pools also tend to be kept in better condition because all the owners are paying fees specifically for that upkeep through the juristic office.
And does dealing with an individual condo owner versus an apartment building manager change things like flexibility?
It definitely can. An apartment company might have standard policies, maybe a bit more rigid on price, but potentially more flexible on, say, furniture if they have various options. With a condo owner, it's more person to person.
So does that mean you might have more luck negotiating the rent with a condo owner?
Potentially, yes. An individual owner might be more motivated to get a good tenant in quickly and might be open to discussing the price, especially if you're a good candidate. Others might be very firm. It really varies owner by owner, whereas the apartment building manager might have less wiggle room on the set price, but maybe standardized procedures for things.
Interesting. So it depends on what kind of flexibility you're looking for. And again, seeing multiple places helps you gauge that.
Exactly. Talk to the agent or owner, get a feel for their approach. Starting early gives you that time.
Okay, moving beyond just finding the place and signing the lease. What practical tips does the guide offer for actually having a successful rental experience in Bangkok?
When you're starting out, really define what you need. Budget, location, must-have amenities. Use online property portals, sure, but also get out there and walk around neighborhoods. Talk to people. Locals might know of places not listed online.
Good point. What about using agents?
Using a reputable agent, especially one experienced with expats like the kind you might find through moveandstay.com, given their focus can be a huge help. They know the market, the processes, potential pitfalls, and definitely view multiple properties. Don't just jump at the first okay-ish place you see. Ask lots of questions.
And understanding local laws. How important is that?
Very important. The guide highlights knowing your basic tenant rights under Thai law. Things like the deposit should be returned within 7 days after the lease ends, assuming everything's settled. Landlords needing to give you notice before just showing up for inspections. Protection against unfair eviction. Knowing these basics gives you confidence and protection.
Makes sense. And what about just getting along with a landlord?
The guide really emphasizes building a decent relationship. Communicate clearly and respectfully. Pay your rent on time, obviously. Look after the place. Why? Because if a problem does come up, a landlord you have a good relationship with is likely to be much more responsive and helpful. Plus, it helps down the line if you want to renew the lease or maybe negotiate terms later.
Simple stuff, but makes a big difference. Okay, finally, let's look at long-term versus short-term rentals. The guide breaks this down too.
Yeah, this really depends on why you're in Bangkok and for how long. Long-term usually means signing a lease for 6 months or more commonly a year or longer.
Pros and cons.
Pro for long-term is stability, usually a lower monthly rent compared to short-term rates. You pay the deposit, settle in, make it your home. Con is less flexibility if your plans change. Short-term could be days, weeks, a few months, offers maximum flexibility. Often fully furnished, utilities might be included. But the con is it costs significantly more on a per night or per week basis.
So basically, Long-term equals better value and stability. Short-term equals convenience and flexibility, but
Yeah.
costs more.
That's the essence of it, yeah. The guide compares them across features like lease length, cost, furniture, utilities, flexibility, management style. It lays it out clearly.
And the market itself. Is it changing?
Oh, yeah. The guide points out it's really dynamic. Tourism affects it, the economy affects it. The rise of platforms like Airbnb has definitely shaken things up, creating more short-term options, but also maybe pushing up demand and competition in certain areas.
Interesting. Anything else?
They also mention a growing interest in midterm rentals. Think like 3 to 6 months. This seems popular with people who aren't just tourists, but maybe aren't ready to commit to a full year yet. Expats on shorter contracts, digital nomads testing the waters.
That middle ground. So how do you decide which duration is right for you?
It's purely down to your situation. Quick holiday, short business trip. Short term is obvious, moving for a permanent job. Long term likely makes the most financial sense. If you're unsure, exploring, maybe doing a trial run of living in Bangkok. That midterm option, 3 to 6 months, could be the sweet spot. More space and better value than a hotel or daily rental, but without that big year-long commitment straight away.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, using the insights from moveandstay.com's guide, it seems pretty clear that renting in Bangkok means, first off, understanding all the costs, not just the rent, but utilities, deposit too.
Absolutely. And then really exploring the different types of places, apartments, condos, and weighing up those neighborhood pros and cons based on what you need.
And the process itself, well, it involves getting your paperwork ready, reading that lease incredibly carefully, and crucially, remembering that negotiation is often possible. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, it seems like research, a bit of patience, and being willing to negotiate are really the keys to finding a good place without too much stress.
So, thinking about everything we've discussed, especially that rise of short-term platforms and this growing demand for midterm flexibility,
Mm.
it makes you wonder, how might the traditional long-term rental market for expats keep changing in Bangkok over the next few years?
That's a great question. Will we see more landlords specifically designing leases for that 3 to 6 month market? Maybe more places offering semi-furnished options or different service packages to bridge the gap between a basic rental and a fully serviced apartment.
Definitely food for thought for anyone looking to rent there, something to keep an eye on. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Bangkok rental scene.
My pleasure. Hope it helps make that maze feel a little less confusing.